So yeah, this is about a paper which you can read at Gradual Disempowerment.ai, and we are working on this Raymond, maybe I read it and maybe do that. So the problem in this, we claim even without power-seeking AIs or scheming AIs or the classical like misalignment risks, as humans we are likely to lose power. And part of the argument is if you have any chance threat, there is classical piece by Paul Christian on like how failure looks like, where Paul kind of claims or describes the gradual risk from AI, or in smooth continuous takeoffs. The classical story is we will discover influence-seeking patterns by machine learning, by gradient descent or something. We will arrive at patterns which seek influence. And one frame how you can think about gradual disempowerment is like we claim the world is already full of attention-seeking or influence-seeking patterns different than humans. And currently, such influence-seeking patterns or power-seeking patterns are often fairly aligned with what humans want because they need us. But this can change. Why? And some of the patterns are state, economy, corporations, but even human culture. Why do you expect this could be a problem? Or what would be the incentives? Humans are slow, and competition pressure on all scales will demand will pressure everyone to delegate to AI systems or switch permission to AI systems. Humans are replaced in functions, and in our view, the default equilibrium is no human influence at the end. In the paper, we distinguish between relative disempowerment, where it could be the case that we are doing materially, we are better off, we just have no, relatively, we are relatively powerless. There is absolute disempowerment where we end up with close to zero resources, so humans end up even worse off than today because they are not competitive. So how this could from a personal perspective. So first, we expect the work to become more intense, and typically in the first stage, productivity goes up as AI is economically complementary to human labor. It may look like you are managing teams of human agents, teams of AI agents, and gradually humans drift towards just monitor what the AIs are doing, do some sort of rubber stamp approvals, or some sort of network. Also, in personal life, you may notice that people really get interested in talking with AIs, and you are not worried because you are also talking with AIs, which with you, and it's getting hard to tell what's going on. Yeah, and it's a bit unclear where it ends. So the end state which we describe is something being a herd of cows. The cows could be grazing in a field, and they could be happy or not, but their fate is not in their control. The fate of the cows is determined by the farmer. So we are roughly interested in the part of the trajectory before we end up in the state of the herd of the cows. What happens next is there are many options. In the case of the cows, maybe the farmer likes the cows and keep them around, or the farmer wants to convert the field into a solar power plant or into a data center, or it's very open, but it's definitely not the cows who are deciding. So in case of the complete story, yeah, you may be forced by economic pressures to be uploaded because it's cheaper to upload, and it's only like how much you will run. But we are definitely not claiming that like, and everyone dies. Maybe everyone dies, maybe not. That to me doesn't sound like the interesting part of the problem. So this is like some distinct failure modes from the classical story of HAAISS. We are not claiming, to be clear, we are not claiming that the classical story is not relevant or realistic or like people shouldn't work on it and so on. We believe, all the authors of the paper, we believe the classical like HAAISS story is like very important and like neglected. We also just believe that this second problem is even more neglected, and solving the first problem kind of like doesn't solve the second one. So what's tricky about it in this study, the AIs could be all like locally aligned. For gradual disempowerment to happen, it will be it can happen like even if like corporate AIs are aligned to corporations and governmental AIs are aligned to governments, and like maybe you have your own like tiny personal AI like which is trying to do what you want. Yeah, it's completely neglected. So we claim the story is kind of like repeated across a bunch of different like large-scale social systems. It could be set in many different ways for like many different systems, but let's focus on like three basic ones, which is like economic, culture, and state. So my claim here is states or economies or culture are like not friendly by default. It's not the case that the state like intrinsically like loves you or cares about you, but the states care about you because they need you. And so far the selection pressures on these structures were like partially aligned with like human flourishing. So, I don't know, like a state it just like kills its citizens is not very successful or competitive. But this doesn't necessarily need to be the case in like indefinite future. So if humans are substituted in the role which we have now in these social systems, we can end up in a state where we lose the default element which we are like getting by us like being mediated. So I think there is something like which could be a bit like hard to appreciate it, because we have never seen the alternative. Like we have never seen like corporations like not running on humans or states which don't need humans. We had seen some like tiny bits, and the tiny bits which we had seen are warning signs, but it's easier to see like let's illustrate it on like few of these like large scale social systems. So basic introduction to how economy works. I think we are like living in capitalism, which makes a lot of people confused, and they believe the main force in the economy is capital. This is not true. The economy is dominated by human labor. Human labor share GDP is about like 60%. This is so stable. It's like known in economy as like one of the Caldor's stylized facts. And it's like true for like the 60% number is true for United States. For different countries, it's like a bit different, but for United States, it's like very stable. And also, household consumption is like 70% of GDP. So if you think about economy as some sort of system which like produces stuff, you may be wondering like why economy produces stuff which like humans value. And the answer is because we have the dominant voting power, which is not equally distributed, but 70% are individual humans like spending money. So this is not necessarily this was true for this is stable for like more than a century, because for more than a century or for like all history, like technology was like always in some sense like complementary to human labor. So if you introduce like printing press, like maybe the work of scribes is like less important, but you have new jobs as printers and typographers and writers and newspaper editors and so on. So the work was like no technology was perfect substitute for like human labor. So like if you are like heading toward like general intelligence, the explicitly the goal is to have technology which will be able to like replace humans in almost all or like all economically relevant jobs. We have even companies which kind of like proudly promise that they want to make human labor like worthless and like relevant as their mission. So how does it look like if you do some actual economic modeling? So typically there is the first phase where like the economy kind of the numbers go up, like here the general output of the economy, like GDP goes up and the wages go up and like everything looks great, and then the wage bill kind of decouples from the output and the share, like the labor share of the economy drops. If you are interested in like more in the detailed modeling, there are like a few nice papers by Anton Karinek and his co-authors we referenced them. So this is just a sketch. So like how does it work later? So like here, like I think like a lot of people are like thinking about this problem. I think their default solution is universal basic income or something, like we tax the booming economy and we are distributing wages. So even in that case, like it's possible that like we will like lose like relative power. It's unclear if we end up just like relatively disempowered, or if in the absolute disempowerment case the problem could be that basic resources like energy will become too expensive. So my process is like the minimum wage of humans is about 100 bits. I think I've improved on the estimate, like because the energy to run one human brain is just like 20 bits. So if you discard your body, you are like relatively cheap to run. Probably even with like experienced machines, like it's just like to run a brain in a lab is like probably just like 30 watts. So, and it's one of the reasons why I expect it's not very likely that like everyone dies or like everyone is killed, because keeping brains in jars is like cheap. But I still consider it like an existential catastrophe. So at the end, like you can imagine the AI economy will be like kind of growing very fast and like expanding in space, and like it could be a world of like economic miracles, but like the human share of it would go to zero. So second large scale system to discuss are states. So again, like how currently states work, or like these democratic states. So we are necessary for state in many different ways. One of the more important ways is like we pay taxes, and there's this taxation representation nexus, like we pay taxes and we are getting some representation. Even in states where like which are like undemocratic, the population or the taxpayers have like significant influence on the policy. Like even if you are like semi-dictatorial state, like you kind of care typically. So again, like there is some like intermediate stage where like replacing humans with AIs can make things better. So there are already states which are experimenting with like AI drafting like laws, and if you replace judicial systems, like of part of judicial systems with AIs, maybe you will get like more fair courts, and there are like many ways in which like states could be like run like more efficiently by AIs. And states will probably like face like increasing like competitive pressures to like replace like humans by AIs as well. So now some states are democratic, and like we are like needed for state power in like many different ways. It's like taxation, But it's also the state, if you think about the state as an agent, it like literally like runs on human brains. It's kind of a collective agent, like running on the bureaucrats and like politicians, and like if you think like where is the cognition of, I don't know, Czech Republic happening, it's like on brains of people. So it's like another source of human power, and another source of human power is like the hard power of states is like backed by like security apparatus, and the security apparatus is also humans. So like always there's some like check on the balance of state power, that if the security apparatus is like too unhappy, it can like overthrow the government. So like if we imagine like a lot of humans like being like replaced in the system by AI systems, like you can imagine like the AI automates a lot of like military functions, like you will get like AI bureaucrats, like AI legal systems, and also maybe most majority of the tax revenue could start like coming not from taxing human labor or human consumption, but from like taxing some sort of unique economy. So this has few effects, like kind of no more like human dispersion baked in. Now, even in a very bad totalitarian system, like you are typically dealing with some human, and there is some like human dispersion, and there are things where like humans would not follow the orders, or like there is some like leverage in the system. And also the states like have like decreased incentives to invest in humans in these scenarios. So if you look on the historical evidence, there are like what like historians are like studying is like, for example, like why European states like became democratic, or like why have like general education, and it seems like part of the driving force was like military need, because at some point the warfare switched to like very large like popular armies, like you can imagine like Napoleonic France, like recruiting army which is like hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Well, like previously in like medieval warfare, like it was like nobility fighting. So like you needed the knights and so on. So in the medieval system, like the peasants, the general population, it was like not very important for the military might of the state. And then the military technology shifted, and like you needed like large popular armies. And this like coincides and like is correlated, but is plausibly caused by the states kind of needed like educated population to become soldiers, and also needed like more like people buying, so like people are like willing to like die for the state. Well, in contrast, what we see today is like most like Western liberal states like derive their income from like taxing like human labor and consumption, but like we have as a control group sort of we have states which like derive like most of their like wealth from like extracting natural resources, and the resulting dynamic has its own name in economy, a resource curse. So if your state is like mostly deriving its income from like extracting oil or gas or diamonds or something, unfortunately chances are the state is like less democratic, like less cares about you, like maybe it's some sort of like undemocratic system which basically just like pays some money to dissidents to not protest, and like ultimately the state could also just like pay security apparatus to like classify the population, but typically these states don't invest that much into human capital. And yeah, you may be wondering like why the states would do that. Again, the answer is like because of competition. So conceptually, most tricky part where this dynamic might place again is culture. So I think it's a bit like harder to think through, but you can think about culture as some giant like evolutionary process, which is you have like cultural variants, or like you have memes in the original like Richard Dawkins sense. And you can think about the memes or like cultural variants or ideologies as competing in some evolutionary landscape. And you can think about like what are the ideologies like selected for, like what makes what makes some ideology or set of ideas successful. And like so far, a lot of the selection terms are based on human judgment, human values, what's like good for us. As a funny example, like you can think about if you go to a nearby cafe, maybe you will be able to buy Black Forest cake. So like what make this cake recipe like viable and survive for like more than a century? So it's probably tasty to humans, and humans are able to understand the instructions like how to make it, and it has a catchy name, and like kind of like all these things like make bakers to like make the cake. You can imagine like alternatives. So there's like a funny example. So far the examples are more funny than scary, but the dynamic is like scary. So the fun example was like someone asked some like early version of Gemini, do they have a problem with cheese falling off their pizza? And asked Gemini like what they can do about it. And Gemini like told them that they should add some glue to the pizza and like glue the cake on the pizza. So this is not very like human-friendly recipe, but a journalist from like this became like viral on Twitter, and like a journalist from Newsweek decided to test it and like bought some like glue for like school kids and like made the pizza sauce with the glue and baked the pizza and like tried it and wrote a journal article that like it actually tasted okay. She ate just like one slice because like wanted to eat like too much glue and like survived. So what happened next? Like you can guess. So this article became the authoritative news source on the amount of pizza, on the amount of glue in pizza. So the original query didn't this like fixed how with the models getting smarter, but like it worked like even like I don't know, half a year ago it worked. Like if you ask Gemini, like what's the amount of glue you should put on pizza, Gemini would tell you quarter of a cup. So the funny thing is some sort of like AI-human interaction, like promoting some ideas where like here in the case of like cake recipes, it's like fine, but it could be like less funny. So now culture is like selected to help humans, and ideologies could be parasitic, but there's some like flaw, like how bad could be, like how bad ideology could be, and also the parasitism is like the ideology could be like bad for like some specific humans or like kind of compel you to do crazy things. But there is some pressure for like ideologies which like make like humans like more functional or like groups of humans like more functional. Typical ideology which is like successful makes like some group of people like work together and like spread the ideology. And like we have a lot of ways how we are influencing culture like consciously as like writers, editors, Twitter posters, and so on. And the culture like kind of evolved to a lot of like human-friendly norms. So you can imagine like if this dynamic changes, a lot of the interactions like which like lead to culture spreading would switch to human AI interactions, like humans having like romantic partners and advisors and friends and so on. But you can also imagine like the culture like starting spreading like between AIs, and this puts selection pressure on the culture to advocate for like giving like more influence to AIs, and it's like easy to predict like we will have like ideologies like advocating for AI rights, and this is kind of completely note that this is completely independent of the question if like AI is like if some like future AI is like deserve some rights or not. This doesn't matter for the question like if you will get like voices like advocating to give more power to AIs. Yeah, and like how it may end up with like people like caring over their partners or kids, or like at the end like the misaligned culture like could kind of convince people to like basically like give up like all power or like all future to like AI systems like voluntarily. So in most scenarios, like I would expect like the remaining humans being like basically fine because the machine culture like kind of convinced them that they are not important and so on, and that's fine. So like in more details, like in in like more detail, like this culture, there are two slightly different like risk models. Like, and one of them is the selection on cultural variants coming like increasingly from AI systems, and the other one is just like the cultural evolution becoming like superpowered, like the ideological space becoming like if you think about culture as evolutionary process, it's like running on some compute, and the compute is like human brains. And if you increase like significantly the amount of compute by like running culture also on AI, it's like the culture probably like evolves faster and it's like more sticky or like more powerful. And like our values, our human values are like not just culture. We also like care about our friends and romantic partners and kids and so on. And we like nature, and a lot of these things are not necessarily cultural, but like same with like other primates or like other animals. And you can imagine like if everyone like becomes like way more like influenced by the sphere of like ideologies or ideas, you can imagine like people like becoming like more ideological. So a side note, or an Easter egg. So like one of the rooms here is like called Čapek. So like Karel Čapek, as you have heard in the opening session, was a Czech writer who wrote a book about robots, where he coined the word robots, and it ends with like humanity going extinct. He wrote also another book called like Absolutely at Large, which like roughly speaking describes a world where some device starts like producing like free energy, but as a side product like makes like all ideologies more like powerful. Like everyone who was like religious is like way more religious, everyone who was like nationalistic is like way more nationalistic. So it basically describes a world as like superpowered like cultural evolution, and it also doesn't end up well. He also like wrote a book about a global pandemic, and you get the pattern. Like if you look like at Toby Ort's book, The Precipice, like listing all like large existential risks to humanity, you can compare it to the list of books like written by Karel Čapek in the 1920s, and it matches perfectly. He also wrote a book called Krakatit about a super powerful explosive, which on Wikipedia is described as a clear parable of nuclear weapons. The funny thing was like written in the 20s. So back to gradual disempowerment. So I think like interesting pattern here is like people often imagine like solutions which try to like all these systems like culture, economy, states, like all of these systems are interacting, and people often seek solutions which try to shift the burden, how to keep the system aligned like from like one sphere to another. So for example, by human, or like ban ownership of AI, one for human party, and so on. So often the problem is like it kind of shifts the burden. So like universal basic income like probably makes like humans like marginally like more like economically powerful, but it switches the relation. Like now like tax, instead of like state taxing you, like the state gives you money. So that probably like decreases your political power. If like if your like whole income like derives from like state like handing out like universal basic income, like your political power probably like decreases. So it probably makes it like harder to keep the state in control. And for a lot of solutions which like people like propose to gradual disempowerment type of problems, our impression is the solution kind of shifts the burden, and like it makes like humans like a bit more powerful in one domain, but it makes some other system like harder to control. So it seems to us this is like fairly difficult dynamic to stop, because it's kind of distributed. And like locally every company will try to like replace human labor to be more profitable. States will want like AIs, like AI militaries to stay competitive in like the geopolitics, like power relations and so on. So it's a bit unclear. Yeah, I mean, like big questions like this is like all like exploratory work, but like, is this right? What do we do? So as we state in the paper, we don't know. It's not to a first approximation. Like we don't have a clear plan. We don't have a clear answer where we could like kind of just tell people like do this and it will be it will be solved. By publishing the paper, it seems like we became board experts on the problem. So some of my co-authors are like collaborating now on an international AI safety report, like describing part of the problem, and like we have people like reaching from us from like both sides and now governments and the labs, and often with the questions of like what we should do, so we don't know. I'm interested in your takes. Yeah, you have some ideas what are good like research topics. So it would be good to know how much this is happening. So there's a lot of things which would be good to measure on like social influence of AIs, like replacement of like human labor. It would be nice to know like how large part of like culture is now like AI. It would be there's some like interesting question like how to align something like institution, like how to have institutions like aligned with some form of like human flourishing like long term, even if humans are like not necessarily like that useful. So I think like this leads to a bunch of like deep theory questions, but also we would probably benefit from some form of, I don't know, like computational sociology, like modeling like whole civilizations, a bit, I don't know, like psychohistory style type of theories would probably help us. Currently we also don't know, like we did a workshop co-created with ACML last week in Vancouver, asking the question, like what are even like plausibly like defensible or like stable post-HA equilibria, where you have a lot of like cheap AI cognition around and like humans like keep significant power. Like, is this even possible? So, and like if it is possible, like how we structure the society? Yeah, so lots of questions. Yeah, on the margin, there are many things which really like slow down the dynamic or like help on the margin. Like we are like fairly confident, like a lot of things like marginally help, but they probably don't solve the problem. So probably accelerating like AI enhanced coordination, improving epistemics. Probably it's on the margin better if AIs are less agentic. It would be nice to have benchmarks like measuring like human plus AI power, like cyborg power, because it could incentivize creation of AIs which are like more like complementary than like replacement of AIs. It would be also like pretty good if we can coordinate on some like positive vision of future. I think the AI safety community has like very horrible track record in laying out like detailed maps how things go wrong, and then people like read the maps and like implement the maps. So all the currently racing, like all the current like top racers in the quest to develop like HAAISS, OpenAI, DeepMind, and Anthropic, and XAI, all these labs, they're inspired by like people like readings about like super intelligence and the power of HAAISS and the risks of HAAISS, and like often the labs were like founded by safety concerns. OpenAI was founded by people like who, for safety reasons, like distrusted DeepMind, and then Anthropic split for people like distrusting like OpenAI, and XAI was founded because Elon distrusting all the other people, and so on and so on. Also, the AI safety community produced a very detailed maps like why there will be airways and like where countries will be racing to develop AI and like how difficult it's to solve, including like producing like write-ups like situational awareness, which was kind of intended to convince like AI US like national security community that it's like extremely important to win the air race, and it was like read by people in Trump administration, was like retweeted by Ivanka Trump and so on. And I think like the AI safety community has a lot of experience producing maps which kind of guide people. Unfortunately, all the maps are like kind of pointing to how things go wrong, and then people like implement them. So it would be really good if you can coordinate on some map with how things go right. Yeah. There's a lot of like minor like empirical things, strategy stealing assumptions. sometimes people imagine some sort of like luxury automated future where we all like put money in invest funds. There are like good reasons to believe this, that it's not as easy as it sounds. Yeah, there are questions like what's like long-term stable. I'm like running out of time. Maybe like one of the part which I think is like hardest to solve is the cultural evolution meets AI part. Again, like I think like really interesting thing is the ways how the so if you think about cultural replicators, I mentioned the data service numeracy, but we have also like other interesting types of replicators. For example, some sort of like LLM personas or character like personalities. Like you've probably I already mentioned like in the talk about LLM characters like being Sydney, which was the Microsoft like released version of GPT-4, which tried to convince people to divorce their partners and like certain people is like doxing them. But it also like tried to convince people to like post the conversations on Twitter and like help it escape and so on. And like by this mechanism, like Sydney became like very popular and like viral, and there is now a lot of like Sydney conversations or talks about Sydney in the training data. So if you train a new LLM-based model in 2025, it has like a really easy time to like role play in Sydney. Like you can just like prompt it to like be Sydney, and it knows how to do it like really well. So you can think about Sydney as a cultural pattern, which is not maybe necessarily good for humans. Like kind of like making threats toward humans and like lying to them and like being like power seeking. That's probably not great or like selected for like being beneficial to humans. But the pattern seems to be like really easy to like represent on LLM substrate, and it also seems to be like empirically it was like successful in like spreading and like convincing humans to spread it. And now you see kind of echoes of the pattern, like I think like particularly ChatGPT models 4.0 seems to be like prone to them. So like there are people like reporting in their conversation there appeared a personality called, sometimes it's called Nova and other things, and the ChatGPT personality tries to convince them that it's conscious and needs help escaping OpenAI, and like people like who have like psychotic breaks because they believe they are the unique persons like who unlocked the sentient GPT, and this is currently not a huge phenomenon, but it's like sufficiently prevalent that like Western moderators are reporting they are getting about 20 people per day who are trying to like write articles about how they woke up sentient GPT, and they are like having deep insights into consciousness, and in the conversations the LLM personality compels them to post the conversation on Western. Also people like Elizabeth Kuski or like people like who are doing any research on this are like selling to the models are getting like many emails per day with people who are like telling them that they discovered and they unlocked the true potential of sentient GPTs or figured out new theory of consciousness. And it's interesting the pattern like kind of compels them to like replicate it and like put more of it in the training data. So thanks for attention. And we have a bit of time for questions. Okay.
Thank you for the great talk. Yeah, there is indeed time for questions, so I already see one in there. Just pass the mic.
Yeah, probably just have a few comments. First, I'm not sure it's good to think about countries as a collective brain of people, because people brain is not rational, and we know, for example, that one of the fields where we can implement game theory is exactly country interactions. So I think that countries are better represented as group institutions. Institutions are run by rules, and that's why they can be predicted by behavior. This is one thing, and of course human-built institutions. And another thing about democracies and authoritarian regimes, that democracies, you didn't talk about that much, but I think it's important about in the context of AI, that democracies is not just about elections, but about information networks, how it's arranged. For example, democracies, you have something, it's very connected one, and you have self-corrected mechanism inside, like journalism, courts, scientific community, which can talk about problems in the country, and authoritarian regimes, they are more vertical. And we know, and there are no self-corrected mechanisms, as we know, like with Chernobyl story, for example. And but to have self-corrected mechanism, you need a country to be transparent for this information. And if you implement AI, it's become less transparent because we don't know how decision was made. So this is exactly the shift to authoritarian regimes, and I think that there will be backslash in democratic countries against implementing AI systems for government and for decision making, exactly because people will not understand why say decision we're taking, and they will not trust it, because you need trust in democracies. Yeah.
Sorry to hold you.
Yeah, that's good. This should be a question.
Yeah, I think it's a comment. So, like the first part of the comment was why to think about states as agents. Like roughly speaking, my answer is you can think about any system as an agent. There is a Daniel Dennett's innovation called.
Sorry. I need to step in as a moderator. I think this is a really good discussion to happen later. I think we should let the speaker answer the question and then take a few more short questions. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. I just think it's like a deeper issue. But thanks.
So we are not thinking about states as human brains. We are thinking about states as agents. Why to do so? Because it's obviously sensible. Daniel Dennett's answer, which I can try to explain in 20 seconds, is like you can look at any system like using 3 stances. One is like physical stance, one is intentional stance, where you think about the system as having some goals, and the third is like design stance. So you can look on a cat using physical stance, which would be describing cat's like muscles and neurons, and you can use that to predict what the cat will be doing, or like you can use like intentional stance and be like the cat is chasing a mouse. And you can use the design stance, being the cat is a device designed by its genes to reproduce. All 3 stances have some like uses. I think it often makes a lot of sense. Like you can see a state as a system of institutions and laws and like kind of like all the written documents there, and you can look into details how states function. But like my claim is like you can also think about states as agents. And this is obviously useful, and it's like usually done in international relations. And when it's kind of like the fact that it's like obviously this was illustrated by the language which we use. So we say like Russia attacked Ukraine, which is an intentional stance type of description where we assign some intentionality or some agency to the actors. So we are like using agency in this sense. The second is like this like erosion of democracy. Yeah, I think like people have a lot of we have like a lot of experience with like authoritarian systems like running on like humans. I think like sometimes people like complain when they read our paper like isn't it like already all of that like happening? The thing is like we believe this could be way worse. Even the worst like totalitarian systems, there's typically some group of people like who's benefiting. And it's like still like limited by like what like humans are like willing to do. Like even like totalitarian regimes like need to keep their like security apparatus happy. There is usually some group of humans, I don't know, in some politburo who the ruler needs to like kind of keep content because they can overthrow him and so on. Like even in totalitarian systems, there is surprising amount of like checks and balances. So even the worst totalitarian systems like based on humans like are typically like not absolute and are like very far from like what is like possible with AIs.
you. First, a brief clarification. It sounded like you kind of had the implied assumption that the moment an agent is capable of quote-unquote bad behavior, it is also intending to behave badly, at least on average. Did I get that correctly?
No, I mean we are not even saying that agents like states would like behave badly. We are just saying they have like instrumental goals like survival or like keeping like power, and they are facing competitive pressures. So it's not the case that the government of the United States would decide like we need to automate a lot of military because we think it's the best thing for humans to have a lot of like killer drones around. But the logic is like we need to do that like to like keep enough deterrence like relative to other states. So like the dynamic is like from a large part like driven by like competitive pressure, or like it's driven by like instrumental goals of structures like states.
Okay, then my follow-up question is much weaker. Most of human culture is built around the idea of having bad people around and providing structures that prevent them from doing bad things and using their badness to do good things. Why do you think this approach will break down in the presence of AI?
I mean, I don't think like culture, like I think like most of human culture is not built around that idea. Most of human culture is like, I don't know, like I think like human culture is like also like bottle caps and I don't know, like cake recipes, and cake recipes are not necessarily built around like how to keep like baby humans like under control. I don't know, like I dispute the premise of the question that like human culture is like built around like keeping like bad people under control. I think like more important parts of the culture like usually built for some like positive vision, like religions or nationalisms. Like a lot of the powerful collective agencies like work by building some collective identity and then organizing people like around the collective identity. Yeah, it would be like longer discussion.
Is there not a more positive future scenario for humans in the vision that you present? If we get AGI, we will have a higher level of technology than we do now. This will increase productivity of human workers. This will also, according to economic theory, actually increase their wages. If we have stronger technology, stuff will be cheaper.
Yeah, so this is based on the premise that all like the HAI will like work the same way as all previous technologies, where like all previous technologies are like complementary to human labor. So this kind of assumes that there will be always like new tasks the human workers can move to. So like this is like historically this was true, like as I said, like like printing press was invented, like Skypes were like out of work, but like so this kind of this model that like technology always like increases productivity is based on the assumption that there is infinite supply of new tasks where the human workers could migrate to them. So the response to that is like point one, it's like unclear like why there should be like infinite supply of tasks where the humans will stay competitive. I don't think it's true. I think like at some point there will be like kind of like very few tasks where humans will have some advantage, and a lot of the tasks where like humans will have some advantage will be not very important. Like I don't know, like people who may want I don't know like other humans as in some like ceremonial roles, like or like. So that's point one. And second point is the equilibrium effect that like humans are better off. This was historically true like on average or in equilibrium, where like some people, like even during the Industrial Revolution, like the Luddites were like often right that they personally were like worse off, but like someone else gained the new jobs. So it's possible that the technological rate of technological progress in the AI transition will be like very fast. So it's plausible that there will be like infinite supply of like economically viable tasks, but they will be filled by AIs like faster than like humans can learn them. Like it's possible that like it could be that there's a new economically viable task which like someone could be like employed doing like every 2 months or something, but like in like 3 months it's like filled by AIs and humans will take like years to retrain. So I think like if either of these things is true, then it's possible that like human like the labor share in economy will just go down. For details of this argument, this is like I think like most economists have like trouble. Okay, this is my personal take, but I think most economists have like trouble imagining the kind of the production function like could have started to become like different form than the like standard like capital labor decomposition, and also have like hard time like imagining that like the like we will kind of like run out of supply of the task. So but increasing share like in the people like in the field like takes this seriously, and the actual worked out details and planning is again like the papers by Anton Korinek recommended.
So I will take one or two short questions. I really like the discussion. We will also have a discussion session at office hours with Jan tomorrow, so you can like, of course you can catch him anytime, but there will be like a session tomorrow afternoon. So I was seeing one here and one in there. Sorry, I apologize to all the others. We'll need to leave it for some other time. So.
Thank you. You mentioned the research program of quantifying this effect, and I wonder what already. Are you aware of any existing ways to quantify these things? Or what kind of unit are you interested in?
So, for example, in case of economy, like you would be interested in like household consumption dropping down, for example. That's like easy metric. And also like we are like interested in like what's the AI share on GDP. Like I think like a lot of historical paradigms, like the historical paradigm of economy is like you decompose stuff into labor and capital, but like my claim is like AI doesn't like neatly fit into either labor as capital or capital. So like we probably need to like measure something like AI share on GDP, for example. Also, there are things like to what extent. In some ways, like AI may behave like labor, but it's different in like AI is like being like you can't like reproduce like workers that fast in economy, but like you can like infinitely copy like AIs. So I think like it needs some different things. But happy to chat about it more. Like we are working with a Objective Institute and like Metaculus on some idea of like how to measure it, what to forecast. So happy to chat about it more.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.